So, well, Rich, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
And well, this is the Relational Activism webinar, but it's a bit of a different one today, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going to do a roundup of our 2023 webinar series. Nine webinars in total. A few dozen guests.
Yeah. I keep forgetting it was that many, and yeah, so this is a bit different because normally we would have a webinar audience, but we decided to do this as much as for ourselves to reflect on what went on last year and the webinars that we did, but also for you. And some of you would have been to the webinars and you'll recognise the people that we're going to put up on the screen and the clips we're going to play. And for those of you that haven't, there's material there that you haven't seen, then I think it will be interesting. And for each of the clips that we're going to show, and we are going to show some clips from the webinar, from each of the clips we're going to do some reflecting and reflect around the themes and the interesting themes and ideas that emerged from the webinars last year. So this is the territory of relational activism. This is co-design, this is social work, this is human services, and it's trying to work with people to recognise that relationships make the difference and to change the part of the world that we can touch in our systems and services. And so if that's what you're interested in, or if that's the context you work in, then welcome. Yeah,
Lovely introduction. So we're going to kick it off with Danny from Lads Like Us. Danny's part of a duo, Danny and Mike, and if you haven't already checked out their work, I'd highly recommend having a look at them and their website or them on social media. But yeah, Tim, should we see what Danny has to say?
Yeah, let's do it.
I didn't wake up one morning and think I want to be flipping, burgling, thieving, drug. It took from months old, and it took till I was 33 to someone to sit me down and say, Daniel, have you experienced any kind of trauma when you was younger? Where was your mum? Where was your dad? How was things when you was growing up? It took till I was 33 for someone to ask that question. Don't be like those other professionals that flipping, like sort of let us down. Exercise professional curiosity, ask those questions, and when we've had sort of social services involved in sort of our life as adults with our kids and stuff. The main reason being my daughter's mum died of cancer, basically. Social services sort of got involved, and because she went off the rails and what have you. And if I think of their experience of trying to understand me, was for me it came across sort of quite judgy, if I'm totally honest with you. They asked me they sat me down and they wanted to go through my history from sort of birth to sort of present day. And there was no, I've had to go in deep about sexual abuse and rape and all that stuff that happened to me as a kid and as a teenager. Getting raped by sort of a gang member and caught up in selling drugs and stuff. And there was no sort of empathy shown when those questions were asked, and I was kind of just sort of they undug all this flipping stuff and kind of just left me to it.
I think I was really struck by Danny's call for curiosity. Felt like it was important. It felt to me like it's important to think as a professional, as a social worker, to be interested in somebody as a person and as a human, interested in their experiences, not just as a parenting resource or a protective factor, or as a sort of walking sort of risk metric. It's more like, let's try and understand. It was the way he framed it, actually, Rich, wasn't it? It was really interesting. He said the process of social services trying to understand me came across a bit judgy. I thought the way, in framing it that way, saying the process of understanding, I thought it was really nice a way to see it, because that actually is how we should start, isn't it? Start to seek to understand is a good position to start from.
Yeah, and I think the reflection on speaking to a social worker about his past experiences is often, it is like an often, it's a part of the assessment process sometimes, but it's like, how can we do that in a way that's kind of that conveys genuine interest and a level of empathy towards their experiences, whilst also recognizing that we need to collate that information to make meaning out of their behavior and their functioning and some of their strengths and some of their vulnerabilities, so that we can support them in a helpful way.
And I think that one of the themes through the year and in the relational activism work is this idea of reciprocity, or learning and sharing. And I think lads like us are really doing that, aren't they? They've got a real curiosity about the social work profession, about social workers, and they're very generous in their approach. And what they're doing is phenomenal, isn't it? The way that they're educating professionals up and down the land is really something to behold. And so we really support that. And we'd want anybody watching this to check out lads like us and invite them to their local authority. And
a big part of what they show us and inspire us to do is around the idea of vulnerability. And I know that's a topic that we like to explore within relational activism. And I think the next clip actually is myself talking about that subject. I really appreciate what he was saying about how he had this shield of invulnerability. It's like there's a coat of armor, but actually beneath that is a kind of little scared boy, and it takes courage to kind of own that, especially when you're under a stressful situation, when you have social workers involved. Well, I mean, this is a topic we have done quite a lot of thinking about recently, isn't it, Rich, about vulnerability? And like the little journey that vulnerability has been on as a term, and perhaps some in social work, you know, I can include myself in that, started to think that it was used too much and was like this label that was stuck on people, or was a sort of patronizing attribution. It's like, oh, you know, we're working with vulnerable people, or that person's vulnerable, so they need protecting. And maybe vulnerable and vulnerability was this big kind of overlay that was closing off the potential for strengths to emerge, for us to see that there are strengths and assets, and people have got capabilities that we're not seeing because we're thinking of them in this fixed way and appraising them as vulnerable. So over a period of time, that seemed to be the position, didn't it? Let's steer clear of that and try to look at people's strengths more. But we've sort of moved a bit in our thinking on that, haven't we, Rich? Yeah, I think so, because it seems like vulnerability is an opportunity or a place from which we can connect with other people and parents who might be experiencing difficulties. And that vulnerability might be in small ways, for example, in saying, if we're asked a question or a parent's curious about some aspect of the system, like for us to say, I don't know, I need to go back and find that out, to admit that we don't know everything. And then it can also be done in other ways, in terms of us revealing some aspect of ourself. For example, I've talked about my dad using drugs and alcohol, and I've written about that in blogs, and that can be a place for connection. And it's like, how do we use that whilst maintaining, you know, healthy professional boundaries, but maybe we've pursued professional boundaries at the expense of connection and a healthy level of vulnerability as a way of connecting with others. Yeah, because we're all a mix, aren't we, of vulnerabilities and strengths. And if you completely cut out the conversation about need, then you haven't, you take away that potential for connection. And, you know, in a more sort of philosophical way of thinking, there's people have written a lot about how our wounds are actually, you know, doorways to connections. And so not recognizing those is to close off that potential for connection, as you say. And I think, you know, it led us to think a bit about strength-based practice as well. I think strength-based practice and
moving away from deficit models is really important. But you've got a strength-based practice, which is just like a one-way thing where I'm assessing your strengths, I'm assessing the person in the community's strengths in a one-way fashion. But I guess what we're talking about is other levels of strengths-based working, a more dynamic sense of you and me coming to agreed ideas about what your strengths are, or even, you being the expert in your own life as the person in the community and able to surprise me as a professional with the things you're interested in or the things that are your strengths. And I was even thinking, Rich, about Math Potts and the of Camarados, because like his big one is about help other people. So if you're in trouble, or if you having somebody, if you see someone really struggling, ask them to help you. So then it's only recognizing strengths, but saying, I might be helping you with this, but you could perhaps help me with that, and that might be like them teaching you a recipe, or you learning something about their local community from them because of that working relationship that you've got.
Yeah, and I think that taps into the value and the power of parental advocacy, which I know that we're going to touch upon in one of the clips later on. So we got Jordell coming up, and he's going to touch upon empathy for victims of domestic abuse, male victims of domestic abuse, and how some of our biases can affect our decision making and outcomes.
With everyone, that it's a lot about validity. Like dads are constantly validifying himself, even things like domestic violence where males are accused as a perpetrator. Don't get me wrong, there are many scenarios where guys do kind of domestically abuse women, or they're in a domestically abusive relationship. I just think society sometimes don't see that same, or have the same empathy when the roles are reversed, when the man's actually been a victim of domestic abuse. I've worked with many fathers like this myself. I've even dealt with a case in Luton before where that was like the first case of coercive and controlling behavior, and it's so interesting to see how your personal biases affect your practice, which affects the outcomes for the family. And I just want to change the narrative one family at a time, or one professional at a time. I think that's the only way.
I think what I like about that is that it kind of taps into a little bit of what Danny was highlighting around the vulnerability of, I suppose, men and fathers that we work with, because often they're conceptualized in terms of risk, but there are sometimes situations where men are equally as vulnerable as some of the mothers and the women that we work with. And my perspective on domestic abuse shifted quite a bit after I read a book called Typologies of Domestic Abuse by Michael Johnson, and he talks about the different typologies. There's intimate partner terrorism, which is the kind of stereotypical male perpetrator, female victim, coercively controlling, violent type of relationship that we're often taught about. But he identifies other forms of domestic abuse, including situational couple violence, which is usually born out of impoverished conditions or stress around employment or money or the children, or it might be due to poor language or conflict resolution skills. There's a whole range of issues or reasons that might lead a couple to have an argument that spirals out of control. And then there's two others called mutual couple violence and another one that's retaliation based violence. But the point is that domestic abuse is a kind of complex kind of phenomena, and it requires multiple perspectives and probably multiple solutions. But there's probably been one story and one set of solutions that's been prescribed to the issue, and I like that was what Jordell was picking up on around working with men and working with domestic abuse.
Yeah, I agree, and oh, my thing has gone off there. I agree, Rich, and I think I was pleased that we did a whole webinar on father inclusive practice. I think this is something that local authority social workers, other people in helping services can really, there's a way to go on this, I feel. And as Jordell was suggesting there, you know, significant levels of like mother blaming or double blaming that happens in the system, where women feel they're abused by a partner and then held to an account in a way that's unfair or beyond their full control. That's happening as well at the same time. So the fact there isn't an appreciation and a full spectrum of working with fathers and mothers and partners, and that sense of gender different practice is something that needs addressing across the piece. And the other thing that was a theme last year, and I think is a consistent theme and idea that arises through these discussions about relational activism, working with relationships, is something, I think it's Hester who talks about 3 planets and talks about the sort of silos in our system. So the planet of the legal system, the planet of the specialist domestic abuse services, of the social work services, and the fact that you need experience and professionals that are going to try to work across and bridge these different worlds and silos, really to understand the different positions and get things done and help that multi-agency working and help that collaboration, which is so important in this area of tackling domestic abuse. And Jordell is a advocate. I know we're going to talk about parent advocacy. We're going to see some clips related to parent advocacy later on, and so that's really something that he's doing actively as a lived experience advocate, is bringing his experiences to try and cross these planets and bring some understanding and getting people talking to each other, which I think is a fundamental that we would probably all agree with. Yeah.
I really like that idea. The did you say it was called the 3 planets?
3 planets. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in the next clip, you're actually going to speak to or about advocacy. So that's a good pivot on the back of what you're just saying there about Jordell.
I think it's really important, but it's and that's a good thing in and of itself. But the fact that the community are requesting it, the fact that there was a process of parents deciding that that was the direction that they wanted to take, it imbues the advocacy in Camden with more meaning, I think, and it enables it to have more potential to that bubbling under and that sort of growth that started at that first coffee morning nearly 10 years ago now. It has more energy. The advocacy has more energy because it's not been designed on a page by professionals in Camden. It's actually something that that parents have imagined themselves and have imagined working and have requested and have said that it's something that they need. And that is what happened in New York as well. So
you're kind of talking about how parental advocacy started in Camden in a very kind of small way with the coffee morning, and how it evolved from there, and that imbued it with a sense of well, what do you think it imbued it with that enabled it to flourish to the degree it has now?
Yeah, I think I really think this is an important point about the fact there was a mandate there from the community, and there was a co-design process. So a long lead in from this coffee morning, which started 10 years ago, and that's obviously something that wouldn't be replicated in all cases or in all places, but having a co-design process, having that Camden Conversations research where parents interviewed professionals and others in the council, and they came to a common understanding that parent advocacy, peer advocacy would be one of the things that could really help make the child protection process better for parents, but also safer overall, more effective for families. So yeah, having that mandate, I think, was really important, and that was the main point I think I was talking to there. Yeah.
What I found quite like inspiring about that is, like, you look at Camden now as one of the kind of leading authorities in the United Kingdom in relationship to parental advocacy, and it could be perhaps daunting to think about how that can be replicated elsewhere. But actually, what your story illustrates is really you want to just start small and allow something to grow organically and in a truly kind of participatory way, and from that might emerge, 10 years later, what you've managed to achieve in Camden.
Yeah, and you and I looked closely at co-design and social work last year, didn't we, Rich? And if you look on the Relational Activism website, you can find a report on a co-design project that we got kick-started in Ends Helford. And, that fundamental thing, I love that slogan from Judith Chamberlain around the disability movement, nothing about us without us. As a well-meaning professional, I can say, well, I think this is a good idea, but I can't really decide on behalf of the people that that we're serving. There's got to be a dialogue there and a conversation, and I think we've got a way to go there in local authorities on that, for sure. And if activism isn't an individual thing, I think sometimes we frame it as such, as a personal individual thing. I'm really passionate about this. I'm doing something about this. I'm an activist about this, that, or the other. But truly, to get things to influence change, activism has got to be collective. So if you've got that passion, if you're somebody in a local authority that's got that passion to make a change, then talk to some people about it, talk to the community about what you want to see. Yeah.
There's a really good paper by Frank Reisman in 1965. It was wrote in 1965 about the value, I suppose, of parents or indeed any kind of person supporting other people when they've been through a similar situation themselves. So what Reisman writes here is that he was kind of advocating for social work to find ways to transform recipients of help into dispensers of help, thus reversing their roles, and to structure the situation so that the recipients of help will be placed in roles requiring the giving of assistance. And he argued that the helping role, if parents could be supported into that, could have a rehabilitative effect. It could help them in terms of a resolution of ambivalence around their own problems, because they're having to support and persuade others to make the right decisions. It has a benefit in terms of improved kind of social status and a distraction from past kind of unhealthy patterns of behaviour.
Yeah, so that really gets to the heart of, I suppose, the potential value and benefit of something like parental advocacy. And I did a research paper on parental advocacy where we reviewed loads of the advocacy schemes. Most of them are in the USA, and just personally, I have experience because my dad went to Alcoholics Anonymous and my brother, and so I've seen the benefits that can be derived from a kind of self-serving system that's been set up in order to support others going through a problem that someone had previously resolved and managed to address themselves. And one of the really interesting findings, there was a group in the USA called Parents Anonymous, which was built on some of the ideas of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they meet on a regular basis and they discuss some of the challenges around parenting, and they offer each other peer support, and they connect each other to local resources that not everybody might be aware of or familiar with. And and the average length of attendance at the group was something like 5.5 months. And I've always found that interesting when you think about the kind of short-term nature of a lot of our support services. Most parenting groups, for example, are 6 weeks or 12 weeks. But when you have when there's an opportunity to access a peer group where there's support and guidance and access to different resources, they'll self-select and voluntarily attend for several months at a time. And it kind of points to maybe a bit of a gap in the provision of services that we have for parents.
Wow, I think that's really fascinating, and it really all of that, those things, that mutual aid, when you're talking there about Alcoholics Anonymous and those peers, those very real mechanisms of peer support. There's also, I think we don't always recognise those as, or think about them enough. And Becca Dove sent me an article recently, which is Black contributions to mutual aid, social welfare and social work history, and it's a list of different Black activists, community organisers in America, and organisations through the history of social work that really supported people and were really fully on this idea of getting alongside others with lived experience. And mutual accompaniment is one of the concepts that span out. I mean, that was Jane Addams, but that spun out of US social work, or Bertha Kaplan Reynolds, who talked about feeling together. But I've been educating myself on those Black activists and contributions to social work in the US, and I'm going to start learning some more about that and integrating their thinking.
Yeah, because there's something about peer support where there's an element of identity, or there's a sense of belonging, and there's the opportunity to receive help from people who are from a kind of similar background than yourself. And so there's different kind of opportunities that can be made available through that type of support. And and we've got Carmen up here, and she's a kind of beautiful example, really, of reversing the roles. Reversing the roles. Slimy, that was a bit of a tongue twister. Reversing the roles. I still can't say it. Reversing the roles. As kind of Frank Reisman was pointing out. So maybe we should see what she has to say.
And Carmen here, the detail that I like as we roll into the clip, is that this was at the beginning of one of the webinars, and I was at home. And Carmen was actually speaking from the office, and Carmen has been in the office a lot in Camden, making relationships, and was a nice feature, really, that parent advocacy in Camden. And we learned that from actually the US and the developments in the US in parent advocacy. Doesn't mean something remote or adversarial. It actually means something that an active presence that's getting alongside social workers to influence, as well as alongside parents. So let's hear a bit from Carmen here.
Myself, I have the experience, the lived experience of the CP process. So it was 10 years, about 11 years ago. So then I have no one to help me at that time. And my son was removed for 6 months. And I have to do everything to going through the process myself, to navigate myself. And it was quite difficult. And then afterwards, I got my son back, and I have all the support that I had from Camden. And then I start to join the Family Advisory Board that team created in 2014. So then I start to learn more about social work and to participate in many activities that we co-create in Camden. and then linked to 2016 to 2018, those time we have a research commissioned by the Camden Safeguarding Board and now Camden Safeguarding Partnership in Camden, that this Camden conversation. So the recommendation is that from parents and the professionals that we agree that we need the parent advocates, this role to help to make change to a better service in child protection process. So then I work with the manager of the child protection conference chairs we develop the policies and how to develop this role, and then we also got trained as a parent advocate still during the pandemic time. But then, so I think last July, we start to launch our service. But before that, we already have this service, but it's not people with lived experience. But since last July, we added that with parent advocates with lived experience. So until now, and we are getting more and more people to get trained. So that is my journey.
Yeah, so that's kind of Carmen kind of providing the arc of her journey from a parent who was on the very harsh end of social services in terms of having her child removed, and then how she attended the coffee morning and how that transitioned into Camden Conversations, and eventually as a result of Camden Conversations came her role as a parent advocate. Is there anything you want to add about her journey or the journey of Camden in of itself?
Yeah, and just to say, I mean, when you at the start you said, and Carmen is a beautiful example, and Adrienne Marie Brown, the community organizer in America, talks about justice and liberation should feel good, and there's a natural abundance there of human relationships, of good intention, and I think that really comes through with Carmen and the way that she operates and the way the parent advocacy thing has developed. There's an optimism there. There's a sense of possibility and positivity with developing services like this. Yeah.
Well, she's a kind of bright, shining example, isn't she, of how someone can go from having their child removed to now being in a position to help other parents who might be in a similar predicament, trying to face the complexity of the child protection or court system, and advocating for a kind of more fairer, kind of a juster kind of system, and helping both parents and professionals in that endeavour. It's really remarkable.
Agree. Well said. And we've got Clive here next on the line. Rich?
This is Clive Diaz, who's done a lot of research around parental advocacy, and so he's just talking here about child protection case conferences.
So generally, parents' experiences of child protection conferences was very negative. So it makes you feel like a school kid and inferior. One of the mothers said that we interviewed. I felt like I was in a corner. I was worn out. It was traumatic. 47 of the 52 parents we interviewed said they found these meetings very negative. And I think a key thing for me is we have the child protection conference to decide whether the child is going to be subject to a child protection plan in England and Wales. The point of that plan is to keep the child safe and hopefully to keep the child at home. And in most cases, children do stay at home when there's a child protection conference. There is a significant minority, around 20% statistically in England, that do go into care, but the majority stay at home. And it struck me for a long time that we have this meeting, which is supposed to improve things for the children and make things better for the family, ideally. And actually, the whole context of the meeting, the way it's held, the fact that there's a vote at the end of the meeting to decide whether the child should be made subject to a child protection plan is deemed to be at risk. It's only professionals who have a say in that vote. It just seems like it's not a productive way of building relationships, building trust between professionals and parents. It's my nightmare. My nightmare scenario is, I've got 2 young kids, is going to a child protection conference for my 2 children. I just can't think of many things worse.
Yeah, so very strident views from Clive there about child protection conferences. We should say those child protection conferences weren't, he didn't do that particular research in Camden or in Baines, but we felt like is really home ground for us in relational activism, because we're working in that system, adjacent to that system, and we really feel that child protection conferences need to develop, need to change, and the system needs to become significantly more inclusive.
Yeah, and I think it's about, we talked about vulnerability at the beginning of this, and there is a degree of vulnerability that's required in being kind of reflexive or self-critical about the systems that we currently operate within. And you can separate out criticism of the features of the system versus the professionals that are working within them, because none of the social workers that I know want to work in an oppressive or an authoritarian or punitive way. But there's something about the way in which the system's set up and the design that kind of makes it inherently, conflictual. And some of that is always going to be a feature of statutory services, because you're basically imposing the will of the state against parents' right to a free and autonomous life. But there are perhaps alternative ways, for example, through family group conferences, as a way of bringing families together and thinking about some of the vulnerabilities or the worries that professionals have, and how we can build and capitalize upon their strengths as individuals and as a family, and the systems around them, and how they can be of a support to them.
And I think it's part of this conflict, or the ambivalence that we hold about a system that we feel isn't working for everybody, is important, and so to be together in the problem, to be able to say that, we recognise that there's a problem, is important. We have to hold our hands up and recognise that we are working in that system, we are social workers in that system, and so we're perpetuating some of those difficulties and harms, but we're trying to also share in that, identifying and rectifying, hopefully, of the issues. Yeah.
And so we've got Breege Featherstone now, one of UK's social work legends and icons, I suppose, talking about multiple voices and hearing multiple perspectives.
And so there were some key messages that came out of the inquiry when it was launched. And you will find them completely uncontroversial, actually. The first one was, though, that it was vital that the perspectives of all impacted by adoption should be heard, and that we should not be running events where you just had adoptive parents speaking, which was happening actually at the time. You would have adoption weeks where there would be very little focus on the voices of even adopted young people. And we thought we need to hear from everyone who's involved in adoption, and they need to be on platforms together, talking to each other. We weren't saying it would be easy, but we were saying that the perspectives of all impacted, and crucially since then, the work of kind of people like Karen Broadhurst and stuff on birth parents, the work of people in this room, Clarissa's work, PFAN, all these groups has been really important in opening up. But I think it's really important to remember this didn't always happen. The fact that we have birth parents now talking on platforms about what it's like to be involved with the child protection system, what it's like to have your children taken away, this is relatively recent. And this means that, you know, as an old lady who has seen progress come and go, we always have to keep fighting for things. They're not automatically, definitely there forever. The kind of current situation we're in could be possibly rolled back. We have to keep challenging things. So that was one of our first messages, that all the voices must be heard. And I'm very influenced by the American feminist Rebecca Solnit, and I argue very strongly always that who's heard and whose stories are able to be told tells us an awful lot about who's valued in our society and what value we attach to which stories. So if we have platforms where we don't have birth parents or adopted people on the platform, we are giving out messages about who's valued.
So she was talking about the Basra adoption inquiry there, and how it was quite an innovative piece of research in terms of it drawing together multiple perspectives in a way that hadn't really been done before, not to the degree to which they managed to achieve it with that report. And I really liked what she said about birth parents now speaking on a platform such as we've had lots of birth parents on the webinars this kind of in 2023, and it's very you can almost like take it for granted, like, oh, this is now how we operate and this is what we do. But actually, like she said, it's a relatively new phenomena, and actually it's a sign of progress that we should be celebrating and feel inspired by, that we've now opened up the dialogue. Of course, there's still a lot more work to be done, but that is a sign of progress that we should be proud of, I think. And if there's one thing I'm proud of about these kind of webinars over 2023, it is the fact that we've been able to bring together different perspectives from different kind of, I know this is like different shareholders, I hate that term, but because so many of the problems that we encounter within children's social work are so unbelievably complicated. And as a result of that, there is a kind of tendency, just not through any kind of malice, just as a way of simplifying the complexity, to reduce issues into single stories, or to simplify it down to one perspective, just so that we can grapple with it in some sense. So I think having these webinars as a space and an opportunity where we can hear multiple perspectives, I think has been incredibly rewarding and enriching part of the year for me.
I agree with that, Rich, and we've had some, as you said at the start, dozens of people come on and be involved in the webinars, and we've had some really interesting discussions and themed webinars on young people's participation, on kinship, for just to give two examples. And I mean, I like the fact that Bruce there mentions Rebecca Solnit, and Rebecca Solnit has also talked about and written about hope, and about a kind of active hope, a hope that's fragile in some ways. I mean, it's a plus and a minus. Perhaps it comes back to this big thread we've had right the way through about vulnerability again, in that the hope that something will change is dependent on us being active and actively allying with each other and having these discussions, and trying to move things forward. So it's really brilliant that we've had the participation that we've had last year through the webinars, and that will continue. So we've got an exciting program for the coming year, haven't we?
Yeah, and I really like that idea that you have to keep on challenging and keep on fighting for the kind of the values and the type of support and services that you want to be made available. Nothing can be kind of taken for granted, and as much as things can go forward, things can go backwards, and so that's why I think we're quite keen to promote and advocate these ideas as much as we possibly can, because there's always going to be a need to instill more participatory, more inclusive, more bottom-up type approaches within our way of helping people.
Yeah, agreed.
So this is the penultimate clip, which is myself talking about a shift in power.
And at the heart of this approach really is about working collaboratively with others, especially those that are typically on the receiving end of services. And what that requires is a shift in the power dynamics and the role of professionals. Because often what happens is the professionals working with people, and I'm guilty of this, is like identifying the concern and then trying to fix those issues with a solution that myself or the service has already devised for the parents. Whereas co-design is in contrast to that approach, and it positions the people as experts in their kind of life and situation. And that idea of positioning people as experts in their life and situation is something that you often hear, but is actually surprisingly difficult to implement. Although it's a kind of a notion that we all subscribe to, I think, as a value, it's surprisingly difficult. And this is where I think co-design principles and tools can help you implement that idea. And so instead of being the kind of passive recipients of help, they're invited into a conversation about the help that they receive from professionals. And then through kind of creative or participatory dialogue, they can explore and identify their needs and develop and deliver and then test out solutions.
Well, I mean, I think that's Kay McKercher is one of our inspirations. It's fair to say, and I think putting all of this activity under the umbrella of co-design, perhaps it's too smooth a fit to bundle it all under that umbrella. But I think there is something really there about how we're more intentional, how we're more thoughtful about how we meet with people, how we start the business of thinking about how we help others really early on in conversations with people in community. And it's so often in our services there's a bright idea or there's a package that comes down the line, or a new method or intervention, and we really should be, some of those ideas are excellent ones, but they should be tested locally. There should be that factor of testing. And I think what the other advantage that you have in that is that you've got that vulnerability and that emotional landscape. Once you bring in the lived experience, you then, all of those ideas and methods we have in social work around reflecting and bringing ourselves into work and holding others without losing ourselves, and all of those ideas that we've got about feeling as well as thinking, all of those can be brought real and can be brought into focus by having dialogues and bringing that lived experience into the conversation. And so it's very directly helpful to us. And one of the other concepts that Kay McKercher talks a lot about is hospitality and being invitational in the way that we're working, and thinking of ways in which we can make that initial approach to people to collaborate with us, and also how we keep that going as well in that activist sense that we heard from Bree Featherstone and that Rich has talked about as well. Yeah.
Nice. So should we do, is this the last clip then? I think it is.
Yeah,
we're talking about roles, rebels and listening, I think.
Michael actually recommended this book, which is a book about community organising and building a movement to end the new Jim Crow by Daniel Hunter. And one of the things that's in this book, if you can see that, is he breaks down, and you'll find this a lot in the co-design literature, looking at different roles within co-design. So we mentioned right at the start, like, what's your identity? You might have your identity. I've got one, Rich has got one as a social worker. But what's your identity and what are you bringing to that team, that co-design team that are working on that project? And it will be different necessarily. It will need to be different. from your perhaps primary identity as a social worker. And so the different examples of this in the literature, but Daniel Hunter offers these 4 identities: helper, advocate, organizer, rebel. So you might identify with one of those. I think the rebel is an interesting one. Kay McKercher talks about the need for provocateurs. People that are going to raise issues, are going to ask questions, and I think we've had some really good questions raised on the chat in the discussion and the flow today, and we really need that. We need that opposition. If we're all here saying, you know, co-design can work for everybody, the local authority can embrace it all, then we're not really listening to all the range of opinions that are out there. And co-design, as much as possible, must take account of that and be listening to those rebels. I've been reading something, Nora Bateson's new book called Combining.
Yeah.
And actually, she talks there about if we rely too much on roles, then we close off, we get back to the silo stuff again, you know, and I think so. But some of that recognizing, situating ourselves in the work and in the cause is important, but also the travel between roles is key as well. I mean, I think we were talking about Carmen earlier, and I mean, she would identify herself at different times as each of those different categories, you know, helper, advocate, organizer, rebel. I think it speaks to the relational activism idea that you, by making small changes sometimes, or I don't necessarily like this way of framing it, but there is some people that talk about, you know, this sort of quiet activism, that, you know, the traditional activism, which is protest marches and loud voices. The alternative to that is doing action in the everyday, being persistent, making the relationships that are gonna be the difference, and that's the way. And that's the way to do things. And maybe parent advocacy, something that we're supporting in our 2 different local authorities, and that we're helping develop nationally. Parent advocacy is a kind of is a loose role or activity which tries to achieve some of those things. Yeah,
I really like that idea of kind of quiet disruption, and it doesn't necessarily need to be instead of, it can be as well as, and hopefully that's what these webinar series have done, is provided some kind of quiet disruption into the kind of normal or stereotypical or you know, one way of thinking or understanding particular issues and problems. So and that's hopefully what we'll continue to do this year, I suppose, as continue to bring those webinars and different perspectives and different voices.
Yeah, we will, and we've got 9 again lined up for the coming year, haven't we? Kicking off in February and running till October, and we've got some recurring themes and topics, and no doubt some recurring people that will be part of those webinars. But we've also got some new themes and ideas and new areas that we want to tackle this year. So it will be really exciting, and the live experience of coming to the webinars and being there is probably the ideal way to interact and be part of this relational activist endeavour. But we also feel there's a lot, and we get a lot out of you know, rewatching webinars, laughing at ourselves, so yeah, do feel free to sort of consume them on YouTube as well, and we're going to be putting the new webinars up on YouTube. We're really indebted to producer par excellence, Andrew Rist, who does a phenomenal job producing the Relational Activism webinars and the videos that flow from them. So we're really grateful to him for all the work that he's done on the webinars, and for Carmen in her support role as well in getting the webinars out there and on the email list. So thank you to those two. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah,
there's a lot that goes on behind, I suppose, behind the scenes. I suppose it's kind of obvious, but there's a lot of preparation and planning that goes into these kind of webinars, and we wouldn't be able to do it without the likes of Andrew and Carmen, and so just to repeat our gratitude towards them. And we hope to see you in person or online. That is definitely the best format, I think, to view these webinars. There's an aliveness and a presence that you can cultivate that's not always possible rewatching them on YouTube, although that is a good second best. So.
Yeah, quite right. So well, thank you very much for checking in on this review. Do get in touch with us. If you go onto the Relational Activism website, which is www.relationalactivism.com, you'll get an automatic request opportunity to sign up and subscribe to our email list, which is an email roughly once every month, letting you know the forthcoming webinars and other things that we're interested in. So that's really worth signing up for. And we'll see you later in the year from February onwards.
Cool.
All right. Cheers, Rich.
Cheers.
See you soon.